So here's the interesting thing about radon. You'll read about short-term tests and you'll read about long-term tests. What's the difference? So radon varies all of the time. It has a lot to do with the atmospheric conditions and the pressure in the atmosphere. What does that mean? Like barometric pressure, maybe you've heard that before. Pressure changes in our atmosphere. Sometimes you'll hear in the news, hey, there's a low pressure system coming in or a high pressure system. There's a new storm front coming in, the pressure changes. And those changes in pressure influence how much radon is coming out of the soil. And so radon is uranium in the soil, typically associated with granite. So it's granite that's in the soil that's decomposing. It goes from uranium to radium to something else, polonium to radon finally. It goes through some cycle of processes where it finally turns into a radon gas and comes up out of the soil. And so the different pressure in the atmosphere can influence how much is coming out. That's where the short-term and the long-term test makes a difference, because sometimes, right, if you do a short-term test, you might test it where for 4 days there was kind of high radon, and then 5 days later the radon levels went down. Or you might test it where for 5 days it was low and then it went up. And so if you do a long-term test, that's really the best way to get an accurate read on what are the conditions in your house. So like a 2-month or 3-month test will really give you a good perspective of what kind of radon you're living with. That said, it's also a really good idea to do a short-term test just so you could find out sooner than later what is happening in your home. So that's the difference between a short-term and a long-term test, and why you want to think about doing a long-term, so you get that big long-term moving average of conditions, radon conditions in your house. But you could also just do the short-term to find out as quickly as possible what's going on. In California, we're only required to do the short-term. That some places require you to do the long-term for certain purposes, but in California they say short-term is good enough for real estate transactions. So that's what we do all the time. But that's the difference between short-term and long-term testing.